Animals know things. This is not superstition or folklore, or the desperate hope of people who want nature to speak to them. Animals know things because their survival depends on knowing, because millions of years of evolution have tuned their senses to signals that human beings have forgotten how to read. Squirrels know when a hard winter is coming, because the squirrels that did not know, the squirrels that failed to cache enough food for the worst winters, those squirrels died and did not pass on their genes. Birds know when to migrate early, because the birds that waited too long froze on the wing. Woolly caterpillars grow thicker coats before severe winters, because the caterpillars with thin coats did not survive to become moths. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to read them. Thicker fur on rabbits and deer. Earlier departure of migratory birds. Unusual intensity in food-gathering behavior. Changes in the pattern of spider webs, the height at which wasps build their nests, the thickness of onion skins, the behavior of cattle and horses in the weeks before snow. None of these signs is perfect. None of them is a guarantee. But taken together, read by someone who has learned to watch and compare and remember, they paint a picture of what is coming that is more accurate than any farmer's almanac, or any wishful thinking about mild winters that people want to believe. Astrid Zolberg learned to read these signs from her grandfather in Norway before the family emigrated to America, before her parents died of fever on the crossing, before she ended up in a Montana settlement with an aunt and uncle who did not want her, but took her because the alternative was letting a child starve. Her grandfather had been a fisherman who lived and died by his ability to read weather, who knew that a storm was coming before the sky showed any sign, who could feel the change in pressure through his bones and read the behavior of gulls like other men read newspapers. He taught Astrid everything he knew in the years before they left Norway. He taught her to watch birds, to observe insects, to notice the small changes in animal behavior that preceded large changes in weather. He taught her that nature speaks constantly, but most people have forgotten how to listen, that the old knowledge survived in remote places where people still lived close enough to the land to need it. He died on the voyage to America, buried at sea like so many others, but the knowledge he had given Astrid survived in her memory, waiting for the day when she would need it. That day came in September of 1886, when Astrid was 11 years old. The signs started appearing in late August. The squirrels were caching food with an intensity Astrid had never seen, working from dawn to dusk, burying acorns and nuts with frantic urgency. The geese flew south 3 weeks earlier than normal, great V formations crossing the sky day after day as if something was chasing them. The horses in the settlement stable grew thicker coats weeks ahead of schedule, their bodies preparing for cold that had not yet arrived. The wasps built their nests low to the ground, hugging the earth, seeking protection from winds that were still months away. Astrid watched all of it. She cataloged the signs the way her grandfather had taught her, comparing what she saw to what she remembered from Norway, adjusting for the differences in climate and species, but recognizing the pattern underneath. The animals were preparing for something severe. The animals were behaving as if their lives depended on extraordinary preparation. The animals knew that this winter would not be normal. She told her aunt. Her Aunt Greta listened with the distracted impatience of a woman who had too much work and too little patience for a child she had never wanted. The girl sees omens in squirrels, Greta told her husband that evening. She says the winter will be terrible because the geese left early. She has her grandfather's madness, reading fortunes in animal droppings. Astrid tried to tell others. She told the children at school, describing the signs she had observed, explaining what they meant, warning that everyone should prepare for a winter worse than any in memory. The children laughed at the strange Norwegian girl who watched animals instead of playing games, who spoke of weather omens like a witch in a fairy tale. Mrs. Prudence Whitfield did not laugh. Mrs. Whitfield, the schoolmistress, listened to Astrid's warnings with the particular attention of someone cataloging evidence for a case she intended to prosecute. She watched the other children's reaction to Astrid's predictions. She noted the fear that crept into some faces, the uncertainty that replaced confidence when an 11-year-old spoke with such conviction about coming disaster. And then she acted. The accusation came in early October, delivered at a meeting of the settlement's council that Astrid was not invited to attend, but learned about afterward. Mrs. Whitfield stood before the assembled adults and presented her case with the precision of a prosecutor. The Solberg girl is spreading lies among the children. She claims to read the future in animal behavior, to know what weather will come through signs and omens. She has told the children that this winter will kill them if they do not prepare, that the signs in nature predict disaster. She has frightened them with stories of starvation and freezing. She has disrupted my classroom and upset the order of the school. This is not prophecy. This is not wisdom. This is a disturbed child spreading fear, and I recommend that she be removed from the settlement before her hysteria infects others. The council deliberated for less than an hour. Astrid's aunt and uncle did not defend her. They did not explain her grandfather's teaching. They did not suggest that perhaps the girl knew something worth hearing. They sat in silence and let the decision happen, and when it was over, Greta came home and told Astrid to pack her things. "You are to leave," Greta said. Her voice carried no emotion, neither satisfaction nor regret. "Mrs. Whitfield says you are a liar and a danger. The council agrees. You have 1 day to gather what you can carry, and then you must go. There is an abandoned cabin 4 miles east. You can stay there through the winter if you survive. In spring, if you are still alive, perhaps another settlement will take you. We will not." Astrid did not argue. She had learned in her 11 years that arguing with adults accomplished nothing, that the only arguments that mattered were the ones made by events rather than words. She packed her few possessions, the clothes she owned, the knife her grandfather had given her, the knowledge in her head that no one could take away. She walked out of the settlement on the morning of October 7th, 1886, with no one watching her go, headed for an abandoned cabin 4 miles east that might or might not still be standing. What Astrid built next saved 47 lives. If you want to see how an 11-year-old exile proved an entire settlement wrong, subscribe to Winter Whispers and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The cabin was not standing. Astrid found it collapsed. The roof caved in, the walls rotted through, nothing but a pile of timber that might provide materials but would never provide shelter. She stood in the October cold, looking at the ruins, and understood that she had 2 choices: give up and die, or build something that would let her live. She chose to build. The site she selected was a south-facing hillside 1/2 mile from the ruined cabin, a slope with good drainage and protection from the north wind. Her grandfather had told her about the old houses in Norway, the ones built into hillsides where the earth itself provided insulation, where the steady temperature of the ground kept the interior warm when the air outside dropped to killing cold. She did not have the skills to build such a house properly, She did not have the tools or the materials or the time. But she had the concept, and the concept was enough. She dug into the hillside with a broken shovel she salvaged from the cabin ruins. The earth was still soft enough to work in early October, not yet frozen, yielding to effort, even if the effort was exhausting. She dug a space 8 feet wide and 12 feet deep into the slope, piling the excavated earth to the sides where it would provide additional insulation. She worked from dawn until her arms could not lift the shovel, slept in the open, wrapped in her shawl, woke and worked again. By mid-October, she had a pit. By late October, she had walls, logs salvaged from the ruined cabin and dragged to the site one at a time, fitted together and braced against the earth that would hold them in place. She built a roof of smaller logs, covered with branches, covered with earth, creating a layer that would insulate against heat loss and shed rain and snow. She built a fireplace of stones gathered from a nearby creek, with a chimney that rose through the earthen roof and vented smoke away from the living space. November arrived before she had finished, bringing the first snow and the first real cold, testing her construction before it was complete. She worked through the snow, hands cracking and bleeding from the cold, installing a wooden door she had assembled from cabin planks, cutting a small window in the south-facing wall, and covering it with scraped deerskin that admitted light while blocking wind. She moved inside on November 15th, with a fire burning in her stone fireplace and the temperature already dropping toward 0 outside. The shelter was crude. The walls were not perfectly sealed. The roof leaked in places where the earth covering had not settled properly. But the temperature inside stayed above freezing, even when the temperature outside dropped to 30 below, because the earth surrounding the shelter on 3 sides maintained its steady 50-degree warmth, because the fire added heat that the earthen walls contained, because the basic physics of underground construction worked even when the construction was imperfect. December brought the cold that Astrid had predicted. The temperature dropped below 0 and stayed there, day after day, week after week. The kind of relentless cold that drains heat faster than any stove can produce it, that finds every gap and crack and weakness in construction that seemed adequate before the testing began. The settlement in the valley began to suffer. The houses that had seemed solid in autumn proved hollow in the face of true cold. The wood frame construction that had survived ordinary winters could not survive this one, leaking heat through walls and roofs and foundations that the wind penetrated at will. Families burned through their firewood supplies in half the time they had expected, then began burning furniture, then began wondering what they would burn when the furniture ran out. The livestock began dying despite being sheltered in barns, the cold reaching them through walls that could not hold it back. And then the snow came. The blizzard arrived on December the 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, dropping 3 feet of snow in 20 hours and bringing winds that piled the snow into drifts that buried buildings to their windows. The settlement woke on Christmas Eve to find itself imprisoned, the snow too deep to walk through, the cold too intense to survive exposure for more than minutes. The wood supplies that had seemed low now seemed desperately inadequate. The food supplies that had seemed sufficient now seemed terrifyingly short. The first family ran out of firewood on December 26th. The Hendersons had 4 children and a house that leaked heat like a sieve, and they had burned everything they could burn, and the temperature inside was dropping toward freezing, and the children were beginning to shake with cold that no amount of blankets could stop. They had a choice: stay and watch their children freeze, or venture out into the snow and cold and try to find help that might not exist, James Henderson chose to venture out. He did not know where he was going. He did not have a plan. He simply knew that staying meant watching his children die, and he could not watch his children die, so he walked into the snow and the cold and the wind and hoped that something would save him. He found Astrid's shelter by accident. He was half frozen, barely able to move, stumbling through snow that reached his waist, when he literally fell into the hillside where her door was set. He pounded on the wood with hands that could barely make fists, and the door opened, and warm air spilled out into the killing cold, and a 12-year-old girl looked at him with eyes that showed no surprise at all. "The family from the valley," Astrid said. Her voice was calm, as if she had been expecting him. "Bring your children. I have room." Henderson went back for his family. He brought his wife and 4 children through the snow to the hillside, following the path he had broken, arriving more dead than alive at the door that led into the earth. They descended into Astrid's shelter and found warmth and food and survival, found everything they needed, packed into 200 square feet of underground space that one exiled child had built with her own hands. More came. The Hendersons had broken a path through the snow that others could follow. The Marshalls came on December 27th, 6 people fleeing a house where the fire had gone out and could not be restarted. The Coopers came on the 28th, then the Dawsons, then families whose names Astrid did not know, people who had heard somehow that there was shelter in the hills, that the Norwegian girl who had been exiled for lying about the winter had built something that could save them. Mrs. Prudence Whitfield arrived on December 30th. She arrived alone, having left her own home when the cold became unbearable, having followed the path of trampled snow that led from the settlement to the hillside. She stood at Astrid's door with frost on her eyelashes and her severe black dress torn from fighting through drifts, and she did not ask permission to enter. She simply stood there, waiting for the girl she had exiled to either save her or let her freeze. Astrid looked at her for a long moment, the woman who had called her a liar, the woman who had told the council she was spreading hysteria, the woman whose accusation had resulted in an 11-year-old being sent into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and a knife in her pocket. "Come in," Astrid said. "There is room." 47 people sheltered in Astrid's earth home during the winter of 1886 to 87. 47 people packed into a space built for one, sharing body heat and rationed food and the warmth that the earth provided when the air above turned deadly. The shelter had not been designed for so many. The supplies had not been stockpiled for so many. But the construction was sound, the fireplace worked, the earth maintained its steady temperature, and the people inside survived because the basic principles were correct even when the application was imperfect. The winter lasted until late March. The cold held deep into spring, snow persisting on the ground weeks longer than normal, the rivers staying frozen when they should have been flowing. But the worst had passed by February, and by March families began returning to the valley to assess what remained of the settlement they had fled. Most of the buildings were damaged. Some had collapsed entirely under the weight of snow. The livestock were dead, frozen in barns that could not hold enough heat to keep them alive. The stored food had frozen and spoiled. The settlement that had exiled an 11-year-old for predicting this disaster had been nearly destroyed by the disaster she had predicted. 8 people died in the valley that winter. 8 people who had not made it to Astrid's shelter, who had frozen in their homes or frozen trying to reach help, or simply given up when the cold became too much. 8 deaths in a winter that could have killed everyone because 47 people had found refuge in an earth-sheltered home that one child had built after being exiled for telling the truth. The reckoning came in April, when the snow had melted enough for the full community to gather. They met in the ruins of the church, which had lost its roof to the weight of snow, but still had walls enough to provide shelter from the spring wind. Astrid was invited to attend. This time, no one called her a liar. Mrs. Whitfield did not speak at the meeting. She sat in the back, her severe black dress still showing the repairs from her journey through the snow, her pale eyes fixed on the floor. She had spent 3 months sharing space with the child she had exiled, eating the food that child had stockpiled, sleeping in the shelter that child had built. She had survived because of the girl whose predictions she had called lies, whose knowledge she had called hysteria, whose exile she had demanded. James Henderson spoke first. He stood before the gathered survivors and said what everyone was thinking, but few had the courage to voice. We exiled a child for telling the truth. We called her a liar because we did not want to hear what she was saying. We sent her into the wilderness to die because her warnings made us uncomfortable. And then, when the winter she predicted arrived, exactly as she had described it, we went to her for help. We begged shelter from the girl we had condemned. We survived because she was better than we deserved. Others spoke. Others agreed. Others acknowledged that they had been wrong, that Mrs. Whitfield had been wrong, that the council had been wrong, that everyone who had laughed at the strange Norwegian girl with her animal omens had been disastrously, nearly fatally wrong. Astrid listened, but did not respond. She had nothing to say to people who had exiled her at 11 and praised her at 12. Their opinions had not mattered when they condemned her, and their opinions did not matter now that they approved of her. What mattered was that she had survived. What mattered was that her grandfather's knowledge had proven true. What mattered was that 47 people were alive because she had built what they needed when they would not build it for themselves. Mrs. Whitfield approached her after the meeting, when the crowd had dispersed and only a few people remained. The schoolmistress walked with the stiff posture of someone forcing herself to do something difficult, her thin lips pressed even thinner than usual, her pale eyes unable to meet Astrid's gaze. "I was wrong," Mrs. Whitfield said. The words came out like she was spitting stones. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about the winter. I was wrong to demand your exile. I cannot take back what I did, but I can acknowledge that I did it and that it was wrong." Astrid looked at her, the woman who had nearly killed her, the woman whose certainty about what children should and should not say had resulted in a death sentence that Astrid had commuted through her own labor and her grandfather's knowledge. "You were wrong," Astrid agreed, "but I did not build my shelter to prove you wrong. I built it to survive. That I could save others with it was fortunate. That I could save you with it was justice. You will spend the rest of your life knowing that you owe your survival to a child you tried to destroy. That is punishment enough." Mrs. Whitfield had no response. She walked away into the spring morning, back toward the settlement she had tried to protect from a child's uncomfortable truths, back toward a life that would always carry the weight of what she had done and what had been done for her despite it. The settlement rebuilt over the following years, but it rebuilt differently. Every new home included an earth-sheltered chamber for emergency refuge. Every family stockpiled supplies based on worst-case scenarios rather than hopeful assumptions. The knowledge that Astrid had carried from Norway spread through the community and beyond. The old wisdom about reading weather and building shelter becoming common practice in a region that had learned how quickly winter could turn deadly. Astrid stayed in the settlement, though she never moved back to her aunt and uncle's home. She kept her earth shelter, expanded it, improved it, turned it into a proper residence that would serve her for the rest of her life. She married a carpenter who appreciated both her skills and her knowledge, raised 4 children who learned to read weather signs as their mother had learned from her grandfather, and lived to see many winters without ever being caught unprepared again. She died in the winter of 1943 at the age of 68 in the same earth-sheltered home she had built as an 11-year-old exile. Her children found her in the morning, sitting by the fire, looking out the south-facing window at the snow that covered the Montana hills. She had watched the weather her whole life. She had read the signs until the very end, and she had never again been surprised by what winter could do. The shelter still stands. The logs have been replaced twice, and the roof has been rebuilt 3 times, but the original excavation remains, the space that Astrid dug with a broken shovel in October of 1886, when she had nothing but knowledge and determination and the absolute necessity of survival. Visitors can tour it during the summer months, can descend into the earth and feel the steady coolness that protected 47 lives during the worst winter Montana had seen in decades. There is a small plaque by the door installed by Astrid's grandchildren after her death. It does not tell the whole story. It does not describe the exile or the accusation or the woman who spent 3 months living with the girl she had condemned. It simply says, "Built in 1886 by Astrid Solberg, age 11. The animals told her winter was coming. She listened. The settlers who had called her a liar, who had exiled her for spreading fear, who had survived because she saved them anyway, they understood what those words meant. The animals had told her. She had listened. And because she listened, 47 people lived who should have died. If this story taught you something about reading nature's warnings, subscribe to Winter Whispers. We have more forgotten knowledge that kept people alive when nothing else could. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been right about something no one believed? History is full of people who saw what was coming. The question is whether anyone else will listen before it arrives.